Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure being here finally at the VRIC. It's my very first time. My name is Ronald Stöfferle. I'm managing partner at Incrementum AG, which is a boutique asset manager based in Liechtenstein. Many people know me for this little report that I'm publishing for 17 years now. It's the Ingold We Trust report. But let's jump into the topic of showdowns. If you search the dictionary for the meaning of showdown, you will get the following definition: a conclusive settlement of an issue in which all resources and all sources of power are used, or the laying down of one's cards, face upward in a game of poker. Now, in history, we have witnessed many showdowns. Darius of Persia versus Alexander the Great. We've seen it in business. Pepsi versus Coca-Cola, Microsoft versus Apple. And ladies and gentlemen, there are real showdowns, but there are also fake showdowns. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the world of professional wrestling, but in wrestling there's usually two different characters. There's the heel and the face. The face is usually the good guy, the most likable character. They're usually brave, honest, and good-looking. I don't know, the women here, would you say that he's good? It's a little bit 90s, but that's Brett Hitman Hart. And then there's the so-called heel. The heel is the bad guy. He's always evil, dishonest, a cheat who complains and fakes injuries. But sometimes, however, the heel becomes more popular, and then he actually experiences a so-called heel turn. The villain becomes the good guy. The villain becomes the hero. The best example of that is The Rock. You all probably know him. He played the role of the bad guy so well that everybody loved him. Everybody remembers his trademark, the people's elbow or the rock bottom, or his slogan, "Can you smell what The Rock is cooking?" Now, why am I talking about heel turns and professional wrestling? We'll come back to that in a second. But in the world of financial markets, there's actually three different showdowns going on. There's the showdown in monetary policy, the showdown East versus the West, and the showdown in the gold price. And this is going to be the core topic of this presentation. Let's talk about the showdown in monetary policy. As you can see, thanks to artificial intelligence who built this picture, the Federal Reserve is playing a game of chicken against inflation. Who will budge first? It seems that we have now hit the point where the Fed must choose between fighting inflation and financial stability. If the Fed chooses the tight road, they will probably risk that markets, especially the bond market, continue to revolt. And turmoil in equity markets will continue at some point. On the other hand, if the Federal Reserve chooses financial stability over fighting inflation, the Fed will risk losing the credibility that they have painstakingly rebuilt over the last couple of months. And when I'm talking about credibility, it's important to go back in history. As you know, after President Nixon in 1971 cut the tie between the dollar and gold, markets endured a decade of chaos, a decade of stagflation and volatility. But that was launched by the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker, who effectively replaced gold with the concept of Fed credibility by showing that he was prepared to force the US into recession, to control inflation. He was able to keep the dollar as the center of the global financial system. And this led to a steady downward trend in inflation rates. As you can see here, we basically had 4 decades of falling inflation. Now, after 2 decades of zero interest rates coinciding with exponential increases in money supply, the time has now come to pay the piper. Ladies and gentlemen, from my point of view, the era of the great moderation is over. Now, why is that important? It's so important because a generation of asset managers, of wealth allocators, of investors in general, they all grew up during 4 decades of falling inflation rates. Inflation was the least concern for structuring a portfolio. But this has changed now. We're moving into recession. I don't buy into the soft landing or the no landing narrative. I tweeted out today actually a survey that was about the Google searches for the term recession. They have completely collapsed. Nobody is searching for the term recession at the moment at Google, which might, from a contrarian point of view, be a good sign. Have a look at this chart. It shows the so-called leading economic indicator, one of the most reliable economic indicators. And what you can see is that this index now has declined 20 months in a row, which is the 3rd longest decline in the last 70 years. Every time this has been larger than 6 months, the US went into recession. Have a look at this chart. It shows US bank credit. And usually, as you know, credit is the lifeblood of modern economies. If we see deteriorating credit conditions, this is both a signpost but also a cause of recessions. Now, usually, as you can see, even weakening momentum of credit growth is a sign that we're moving into a recessionary environment. But what we're seeing now is even negative growth. So we are seeing contracting bank credit, which is a big warning sign. Actually, the last time we saw it was in 2008, 2009. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm clearly not in the soft landing camp. The only reason why the US is not in a recession yet is because they're running a budget deficit of 8%. We've never seen it in the last 100 years outside of recessions or major wars. And of course, this fiscal stimulus works. But at some point, somebody has to pay the bills.
Quick break here, guys. Today's episode is brought to you by Coppernico Metals. Now, regular viewers of my channel will be familiar with the entrepreneur behind Coppernico. His name is Ivan Bebek. Now, although a young man in this business, Ivan's already created tremendous value for his shareholders in the past, namely with Caden Resources, which he sold to Agnico Eagle, and Keegan Resources, which became a mine now owned by Galliano Gold. Now, Ivan has surrounded himself with expertise from BHP, Newmont, and VRIC on his board at Coppernico Metals. Check out CoppernicoMetals.com. Now back to the interview.
Now, why is it important? We crunched the numbers in our last In Gold We Trust report and said, well, actually, a recession is not the end of the world. It's just a reallocation of resources. And as you can see on this chart, gold actually is a pretty reliable recession hedge, while silver, the S&P and commodities only start really performing at later stages of a recession. Interestingly, we couldn't believe it actually, mining stocks perform pretty well except for phase 3. So this is the later part of recessions. So if you think a recession is coming, ladies and gentlemen, I think that gold is a pretty good idea.